The ice cracked beneath Sophia Graham's boots, and in the space of a single heartbeat, the frozen surface of Miller's Pond shattered like glass, plunging her into water so cold it stole the breath from her lungs before she could even scream. It was February 1883, and Winnetka, California had been gripped by an unseasonable cold snap that turned the mountain valley into a frozen wasteland. The pond, nestled at the edge of the ranching settlement, had frozen solid for the first time in living memory, and Sophia, at 22 years old and stubborn as they came, had insisted on taking the shortcut across it despite her father's warnings that morning. Now, as the icy water closed over her head and the current beneath the frozen surface dragged her sideways, away from the hole she'd fallen through, Sophia understood exactly how foolish pride could kill a person. She clawed upward, her heavy wool coat and skirts becoming anchors that pulled her down. Her gloved hands struck ice, solid and impenetrable, and panic seized her chest more tightly than the cold. The current had swept her under the frozen expanse, and she couldn't find the opening. Her lungs burned. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, and she thought of her mother, dead these 5 years, and wondered if she'd see her soon. Lucas Kane had been riding the fence line of his uncle's ranch when he saw the woman cross onto the ice. He'd opened his mouth to shout a warning when she disappeared, swallowed by the pond as if it had been waiting for her. He didn't think. Thinking would have told him the ice was too dangerous, that he'd likely die trying to save someone who was probably already dead. Instead, Lucas kicked his horse into a gallop and threw himself from the saddle while still 20 feet from the pond's edge. He ran, his boots sliding on the frozen ground, and when he hit the ice, he didn't slow down. He could see the dark shadow beneath the surface, drifting further from the jagged hole. Lucas was 26, born and raised in these mountains, and he knew water and ice the way some men knew cards or cattle. He knew she had maybe a minute before the cold stopped her heart. Lucas pulled the hatchet from his belt, the one he'd been using to clear brush that morning, and brought it down on the ice with every ounce of strength in his body. The blade bit deep, sending cracked spider webbing across the surface. He struck again and again, following the shadow beneath, racing against death itself. The ice was thick, nearly 4 inches, and his arms burned with the effort, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. "Hold on," he growled through gritted teeth, though she couldn't hear him. "Just hold on." The hatchet broke through, and freezing water sprayed up into his face. Lucas widened the hole with desperate strikes, then dropped to his knees and plunged his arms into water that felt like 1,000 knives stabbing into his flesh. His hands found fabric, heavy and waterlogged, and he grabbed hold and pulled. Sophia's body was limp and impossibly heavy. Lucas threw himself backward, dragging her up through the hole he'd made, ice crumbling around them. The surface beneath him groaned ominously, and he knew they had seconds before it gave way completely. Still pulling Sophia with one arm locked around her chest, he began to crawl backward, distributing his weight as best he could, dragging them both toward shore. The ice held. Barely. By the time Lucas reached solid ground, his entire body was shaking so hard he could barely control his movements. Sophia wasn't breathing. Her lips were blue, her face gray as ash, and her eyes were closed. Lucas laid her flat on the frozen ground and turned her head to the side, and water poured from her mouth. He pressed on her back, hard, the way his uncle had shown him once after a ranch hand nearly drowned in the creek. More water came up, and then, miracle of miracles, Sophia coughed. It was a wet, rattling sound, but it was life. Lucas turned her onto her back and stripped off his heavy coat, then hers, the wet fabric steaming in the frigid air. He wrapped her in his dry coat and lifted her into his arms. She was unconscious but breathing, and that would have to be enough. His horse had stayed nearby, trained and steady, and Lucas managed to haul himself and Sophia into the saddle. The ride to the Graham ranch took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Lucas held Sophia against his chest, trying to share what warmth his body still had, though he was shaking so hard his teeth rattled. He'd been in the water for maybe 30 seconds, and that had been enough to chill him to the bone. She'd been under for at least 2 minutes. That she was alive at all defied explanation. Samuel Graham met them at the door, his weathered face going pale when he saw his daughter's limp form. "Sophia, good God, what happened?" "The pond," Lucas managed through numb lips. "She went through. We need to warm her up now." They carried her inside, where the fire was already blazing in the stone hearth. Samuel's housekeeper, an older Mexican woman named Rosa who'd been with the family for decades, took charge immediately. She barked orders in rapid Spanish and English, and within minutes, they had Sophia stripped of her wet clothes and wrapped in blankets near the fire. Rosa made Lucas sit as well, wrapping him in dry quilts and pressing hot coffee into his hands. "You saved her life," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "That ice should have killed you both." Lucas couldn't respond. His jaw was clenched too tightly, his whole body racked with violent shivers. He watched Sophia's face, looking for signs of consciousness, but she remained still and pale as death. Rosa rubbed Sophia's hands and feet, trying to restore circulation, and gradually, slowly, color began to return to the young woman's face. Her breathing evened out, deepened, and after what felt like an eternity, her eyelids fluttered. Sophia's first conscious thought was that she was on fire. Her skin burned, her lungs burned, everything hurt with an intensity that made her want to cry out. She forced her eyes open and saw flames dancing nearby. For a confused moment, she thought she'd died and gone somewhere unexpected, but then her father's face swam into view above her. "Papa," her voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. "Thank God," Samuel breathed. He took her hand, his own shaking. "You scared 10 years off my life, girl." Memory returned in a rush. The ice, the fall, the terrible crushing cold and the darkness and the certainty that she was going to die. "How did I? Someone pulled me out." "That would be me, madam." Sophia turned her head and saw him for the first time. He sat a few feet away, wrapped in blankets like she was, his dark hair still damp and curling at his temples. His face was angular and weathered, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked exhausted and cold and absolutely steady, as if pulling half-drowned women from beneath frozen ponds was something he did every Tuesday. "You broke through the ice," Sophia said, pieces of memory surfacing. She remembered the sound, the desperate hammering from above, the sudden grip on her body pulling her toward light. "I was under the ice and you broke through." "Yes, madam, you could have died." Lucas shrugged, a slight movement beneath the blankets. "So could you." Seemed like it would have been a waste. Despite everything, despite the pain and the cold and the knowledge that she'd just survived something that should have killed her, Sophia felt a smile tug at her lips. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "It's plenty," Lucas said. He met her eyes and something passed between them, some acknowledgement of the gravity of what had just happened, of the life debt that now existed. "Just promise you will stay off the ice from now on." "That," Sophia said, "is a promise I can make." Rosa insisted that both of them stay near the fire for the rest of the day. Samuel sent one of his ranch hands to inform Lucas's uncle, Jacob Kane, that his nephew would be staying at the Graham place overnight. Lucas protested that he was fine, but Rosa fixed him with a look that could have melted the pond ice all on its own, and he subsided. As the afternoon wore into evening, With the fire crackling and the cold wind howling outside, Lucas and Sophia talked. It started with simple questions about the accident, but it grew into something more. Sophia learned that Lucas had come to California from Colorado 6 months ago, following his uncle's invitation to help run the cattle ranch that bordered the Graham property. He was quiet but not shy, thoughtful in his speech, and possessed of a dry humor that caught Sophia off guard and made her laugh despite the ordeal she'd been through. Lucas learned that Sophia had grown up on this ranch, had learned to ride and shoot and rope cattle alongside her father's hired hands. Her mother had died of fever when Sophia was 17, and since then, she'd been running the household and helping manage the ranch. She was educated, having attended a school in Sacramento for 3 years, and she had opinions about everything from cattle breeding to territorial politics that she expressed with an intensity that made her eyes spark. Most women I know would have taken to their beds for a week after something like that, Lucas observed as the sun set outside. Sophia gave him a sharp look. Most men I know would have ridden right past instead of risking their necks. I suppose we are both unusual. I suppose we are. That night, Lucas slept on a cot in the front room while Sophia rested in her own bed upstairs. But neither of them slept much. Sophia lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the ghost of frozen water in her lungs and the memory of hands pulling her back from the darkness. She kept thinking about the man downstairs, about the split-second decision he'd made to risk everything for someone he didn't know, about the way his eyes had held hers across the firelight. Lucas, for his part, couldn't stop seeing her face beneath the ice, couldn't stop feeling the weight of her body as he dragged her to safety. He'd saved men before, pulled a cowhand from a flash flood once, helped his uncle after a horse had thrown him. But this felt different. The terror he'd felt when he thought she might die, when he'd broken through that ice and couldn't find her at first, had been visceral and consuming. He told himself it was natural that anyone would feel that way, but lying there in the dark, he knew it was more than that. The next morning dawned clear and slightly warmer. The cold snap was breaking and water dripped from icicles hanging off the eaves. Lucas rose early, as was his habit, and found Samuel in the kitchen drinking coffee. "How is she?" Lucas asked. "Still sleeping," Samuel said. He poured Lucas a cup and studied him over the rim of his own. "You know, I have worked this land for 30 years. I have seen men do brave things and stupid things, and sometimes both at once. What you did yesterday was the bravest damn thing I have ever witnessed." Lucas felt his face heat. "Any man would have done the same." "No," Samuel said firmly. "They would not have. Most men would have gone for help, would have taken the safe path. You risked your life without hesitation. That tells me something about your character, son." Before Lucas could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs and Sophia appeared in the doorway. She was dressed in a simple blue calico dress, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a braid, and she looked pale but steady. "You should be resting," Samuel said immediately. "I have rested enough," Sophia replied. She looked at Lucas and color touched her cheeks. "Good morning." "Morning, madam. Please, it is Sophia. I think being pulled from a frozen pond gives us the right to use given names, do not you think?" A smile tugged at Lucas's mouth. "Then you should call me Lucas." Breakfast was a simple affair of eggs and bacon and fresh bread, but it was one of the best meals Lucas had ever eaten. Maybe it was surviving a near-death experience, or maybe it was the company, but everything seemed sharper, more vivid. The food tasted better, the coffee was stronger, and the morning light streaming through the kitchen window was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. After breakfast, Lucas knew he needed to get back to his uncle's ranch. There was work waiting, cattle to tend, fences to mend. but leaving felt harder than it should have. "I will ride out with you," Sophia announced. "The hell you will," Samuel said. "Papa, I am fine. The fresh air will do me good. You nearly died yesterday." "But I did not, thanks to Lucas." Sophia's chin came up in a way that Lucas was beginning to recognize as a warning sign. "I am not going to hide in the house like an invalid." Samuel looked at Lucas as if appealing for backup, but Lucas just shrugged. He'd known this woman for less than a day, but he already understood that when Sophia Graham set her mind to something, arguing was pointless. They rode out together under a sky that was slowly clearing, the clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of blue. Sophia's horse, a pretty chestnut mare named Daisy, pranced nervously at first, but she settled quickly under Sophia's confident hands. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, following the fence line that separated the Graham and Kane properties. "You like it here?" Sophia asked eventually. "California, I mean, after Colorado." Lucas considered the question. "It is different. Warmer usually, more people, but the land is good and my uncle has been generous. I like it well enough." "Why did you leave Colorado?" "My parents both passed within a year of each other. Fever took my mother and my father just seemed to give up after that. There was not anything holding me there anymore." Lucas paused. "My uncle wrote and said he could use the help, and starting over somewhere new seemed like the right thing to do." "I am sorry about your parents. It was a few years back now. The grief is not so sharp anymore." He glanced at her. "Your father said you lost your mother." "5 years ago this spring. Fever like your mother. It came on so fast. One day she was fine, laughing and making plans for my birthday, and a week later she was gone." Sophia's voice was steady, but Lucas could hear the pain underneath. "Papa has not been the same since." "They loved each other something fierce. That must have been nice, growing up with parents like that." "It was. It also made it hurt more when she died." Sophia turned to look at him, her eyes serious. "But I would not trade the time we had just to avoid the pain of losing her." "The love was worth the grief." Lucas nodded slowly. "I think you are right about that." They reached the boundary of the Kane ranch, and Lucas knew he should say goodbye, should head in to face his uncle's questions about yesterday's adventure, but he found himself reluctant to leave. "Would you like to come to dinner this Sunday?" Sophia asked suddenly. "At our place. My father mentioned it this morning. He wants to thank you properly." "You do not need to do that." "I know we do not need to. We want to." Sophia met his eyes. "I want to, please." Lucas couldn't think of a single reason to refuse and several very compelling reasons to accept, chief among them the hope of seeing Sophia again soon. "Then I would be honored." Sophia's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. Come around 4, and Lucas, thank you again." "For my life." He watched her ride away, sitting straight and confident in her saddle despite everything she'd been through, and felt something shift in his chest. Something that felt suspiciously like his heart, recognizing a truth his mind had not quite caught up to yet. The week that followed was one of the longest of Lucas's life. He threw himself into ranch work with an intensity that had his uncle raising eyebrows and making pointed comments about young men and pretty girls. Lucas deflected as best he could, but the truth was he could not stop thinking about Sophia. About her strength and her stubbornness, about the way she'd nearly died and still insisted on riding out the next morning. About her smile and her sharp mind, and the way she'd looked at him across the breakfast table. He told himself he was being foolish, that one day of acquaintance did not mean anything, that she was probably just being polite by inviting him to dinner. But he found himself counting down the days nonetheless. Sunday arrived with clear skies and temperatures that had climbed above freezing for the first time in weeks. The pond ice was melting, breaking up into chunks that floated lazily in water that looked deceptively peaceful. Lucas rode past it on his way to the Graham ranch and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Sophia met him at the door, and Lucas forgot how to breathe for a moment. She wore a green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her hair was pinned up in a way that made her look elegant and sophisticated. She smiled when she saw him, and whatever nervousness Lucas had been feeling evaporated. "You came," she said. "Of course I came." "Good." She stepped aside to let him in. "Papa is in the study going over accounts, but dinner is almost ready. Rosa has been cooking all day." Dinner was a feast. Rosa had prepared roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and an apple pie that made Lucas close his eyes in appreciation after the first bite. But better than the food was the conversation. Samuel told stories about the early days of the ranch, about cattle drives and close calls with rustlers, and the hard work of building something from nothing. Sophia added her own memories, laughing about childhood misadventures and the time she tried to break a wild horse and ended up in the creek. "She was always fearless," Samuel said with a mixture of pride and exasperation. "Even as a little girl. Used to give her mother fits, climbing trees and racing the ranch hands." "Someone had to keep things interesting," Sophia said. Lucas found himself relaxing, laughing, feeling more at home than he had in months. The Graham house was warm and welcoming, filled with memories and love despite the loss that had touched it. He could see why Sophia had grown up strong and confident here. After dinner, Sophia suggested a walk. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was mild enough that they only needed light jackets. They walked toward the pond, drawn by some unspoken agreement to confront the place that had nearly taken Sophia's life. "It looks different now," Sophia said, staring at the melting ice. "Less threatening. Water is always dangerous, no matter how it looks," Lucas said. "I am just glad I was there." "So am I." Sophia turned to face him. "Lucas, I have been thinking about what happened all week. About what it means." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you saved my life. That is not a small thing. It is maybe the biggest thing anyone has ever done for me, and I keep wondering why." "Why?" Lucas frowned, confused. "Because you were in danger. Because I could not just stand by and watch you die. But you did not know me. You risked everything for a stranger. That does not matter, it does to me." Sophia stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "I need to understand. What made you do it?" Lucas thought about the question, tried to find words for something that had been pure instinct. "When I saw you fall through that ice, something inside me just reacted. There was not any decision, not really. It was like my body knew what to do before my mind could catch up. And when I was breaking through that ice, when I was pulling you out, all I could think was that I had to save you, that the world would be wrong somehow if you were not in it." Sophia's breath caught. "Lucas, I know it sounds crazy. I did not even know your name." "It does not sound crazy." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "It sounds like something out of a story, like fate." "You believe in fate?" "I did not used to," Sophia said softly, "but maybe I do now." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, hands linked, the pond rippling gently beside them. Lucas knew he should be careful, should protect his heart against disappointment, but looking at Sophia in the fading light, he found he did not want to be careful. He wanted to take a chance, to risk something meaningful. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Not because of what happened, just because I want to." Sophia's smile was answer enough, but she said it anyway. "Yes, I would like that very much." The weeks that followed were a revelation for both of them. Lucas found reasons to visit the Graham ranch, sometimes bringing messages from his uncle, sometimes just stopping by to see if Sophia wanted to ride out and check the herds. Sophia welcomed him every time, and they fell into an easy partnership. They rode the fence lines together, talked about their hopes and dreams, shared stories from their pasts. Lucas learned that Sophia wanted to expand the ranch, to bring in new breeding stock and modernize their operation. Sophia learned that Lucas dreamed of owning his own land someday, of building something lasting. Samuel watched the growing relationship with approval. He liked Lucas, trusted him in a way he trusted few men, and he could see that his daughter was happier than she'd been since her mother died. Rosa was more direct in her opinions, catching Lucas one afternoon and informing him in her no-nonsense way that if he hurt Sophia, she would personally make him regret it. Lucas assured her that was the last thing he wanted to do. Spring came to Winnetka in a rush of green and gold. The hills exploded with wildflowers, and the cattle grew fat on the new grass. The ranch work was endless, but Lucas did not mind. He was stronger now, more confident, and he was building something here. Not just a career or a future, but a life that mattered. One evening in late April, Lucas invited Sophia to a dance being held in town. Winnetka was not much of a town, really, just a collection of buildings clustered around a general store and a saloon. But someone had declared it was time for a social event, and the whole valley had turned out. Lucas had never been much for dancing, but the thought of holding Sophia in his arms was motivation enough to learn. Sophia wore a dress the color of cream, with tiny blue flowers embroidered on the bodice, and Lucas thought she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. They danced awkwardly at first, Lucas stumbling over his own feet, but Sophia just laughed and helped him find the rhythm. Eventually, they got the hang of it, moving together across the wooden floor while the fiddles sang and the other couples swirled around them. "You are getting better," Sophia said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "I have a good teacher. Or maybe you just need the right motivation." Lucas pulled her a little closer, properly conscious of propriety but unable to resist. "Maybe I do." They danced until the musicians needed a break, then stepped outside into the cool night air. Other couples had the same idea, and the street was filled with people talking and laughing. Lucas and Sophia found a quiet spot near the edge of town, where they could see the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I am glad you came to California," Sophia said suddenly. "So am I. Even though it almost got you killed." Lucas turned to look at her, this woman who had become so important to him so quickly. "Especially because of that. If none of that had happened, I might never have met you. Or I might have just been the neighbor, someone you waved to across the fence. This way we got to really know each other." That is a very optimistic way of looking at nearly drowning. I am trying to be more optimistic these days. Lucas took a breath, gathering his courage. "Sophia, I need to tell you something, all right? I know we have not known each other very long, just a few months really. But I feel like I have known you longer, like I was meant to know you." Lucas took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I am falling in love with you. I think maybe I have been since the moment I pulled you out of that water, and I needed you to know that." Sophia's eyes were bright in the starlight, shining with something that made Lucas's heart race. "Lucas Kane, you are the most genuine man I have ever met. You saved my life and then you gave me something to live for. I love you too. I have for weeks now." Lucas kissed her then, a soft and careful kiss that held all the promise of the future they were beginning to imagine. Sophia kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, and the world fell away until there was just the two of them and the infinite possibilities spreading out before them. They courted properly after that, though the whole valley already knew how they felt about each other. Lucas would ride over to the Graham ranch in the evenings, and they would sit on the porch talking until the stars came out. Sometimes they rode out together, checking the herds or just exploring the hills. On Sundays, Lucas came to dinner, and afterward, he and Samuel would talk about ranching and cattle and the future of the valley while Sophia listened and added her own thoughts. In July, during the hottest part of summer, Lucas asked Samuel for permission to marry Sophia. They were in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal any day, and Lucas just said it straight out because he'd never been good at fancy speeches. "Sir, I love your daughter, and I want to marry her. I know I do not have much to offer right now, just a job working for my uncle and some savings, but I am a hard worker and I will spend every day of my life making sure she is happy and safe. I would like your blessing." Samuel looked at him for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Then he smiled and it transformed him, made him look younger and less careworn. "Son, you saved my daughter's life. You gave me back the most precious thing in the world to me, and more than that, you have made her happy. I see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. She loves you and you love her, and that is all I have ever wanted for her. You have my blessing and my gratitude." They shook hands, and Lucas felt a weight he had not known he was carrying lift from his shoulders. Now he just had to ask Sophia and hope she said yes. He planned it carefully, wanting it to be special. He took her to the pond on a warm evening in August, back to the place where everything had started. The water was smooth as glass, reflecting the sunset sky, and dragonflies darted over the surface. It looked peaceful and beautiful, nothing like the deadly trap it had been 6 months ago. "Why are we here?" Sophia asked, though she was smiling like she suspected something. "Because this is where I found you," Lucas said, "or where you found me, depending on how you look at it. This place changed both our lives." "That is true." Lucas took her hands in his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Sophia Graham, you are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. You challenged me and inspired me and made me want to be a better man. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling so wide it had to hurt. "Yes. Yes, Lucas. Of course I will marry you. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Lucas pulled out the ring he'd bought with a month's wages, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone, and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate, pouring all his love and hope into it, and Sophia kissed him back with equal fervor. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too. So much." They were married in September when the weather had cooled and the hills were turning gold. The ceremony was held at the Graham Ranch, with most of the valley in attendance. Sophia wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit, and she looked like an angel. Lucas wore his best suit, borrowed from his uncle, and he felt like the luckiest man alive. They said their vows under an arbor covered in late-blooming roses, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. Samuel walked Sophia down the makeshift aisle, his eyes wet with tears, and placed her hand in Lucas's with a whispered blessing. The pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and when Lucas kissed his bride, the entire crowd erupted in cheers. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud, with music and dancing and enough food to feed the whole county. People told stories and made toasts, and Samuel stood up and thanked Lucas again for saving his daughter, for giving him back hope when he'd thought he'd lost it forever. Rosa cried and hugged them both, and Lucas's uncle Jacob clapped him on the back and told him he'd done well for himself. As the sun set and the party continued, Lucas and Sophia slipped away for a moment of privacy. They walked to the pond, holding hands, their future stretching out before them bright and full of promise. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sophia said. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I keep thinking about that day, about falling through the ice. If you had ridden past, if you had gone for help instead of coming yourself, I would have died. Everything we have now, this love and this life, it would not exist. But it does exist. We are here together, and that is all that matters. I know. I just feel grateful every single day." Lucas turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "I am the grateful one, Sophia. You gave me a reason to take risks, to believe in something bigger than myself. You gave me a home and a family and a future worth fighting for." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, man and wife, their hearts beating in rhythm, their lives forever intertwined. Lucas and Sophia settled into married life with the same partnership they had built during their courtship. Samuel had given them 20 acres of the Graham ranch as a wedding present, and they began building their own house on a rise overlooking the valley. Lucas worked on construction every spare moment, and Sophia helped, refusing to be relegated to traditional women's work. Together they raised the frame, laid the floors, and built something that was truly theirs. The house was finished by Christmas, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and large windows that let in the morning light. They moved in on a cold December day, carrying their few possessions and a whole lot of hope. That first night, they made love in front of the fireplace on a pile of blankets, too excited to wait for the bed frame to be assembled, and afterward, they lay tangled together and talked about all the years ahead of them. "How many children do you want?" Sophia asked, tracing patterns on Lucas's chest. "As many as you are willing to have," Lucas said, "though I have heard they are a fair amount of work." "Just a fair amount," Sophia laughed. "I think that might be an understatement, but I want children. I want this house filled with noise and life." "Then that is what we will have." Winter passed into spring, and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Lucas proved to have a gift for breeding cattle, selecting the best stock and improving the herd year by year. Sophia managed the finances and the business side, negotiating deals with buyers and suppliers with a sharp mind and sharper instincts. They made a formidable team, and people in the valley soon learned that the Kanes were folks to be respected. In August of 1884, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. She told Lucas one evening after dinner, simply taking his hand and placing it on her still flat belly and saying, "We are going to have a baby." Lucas's reaction was pure joy. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy, and then he set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should I get the doctor?" "Lucas, I am fine. Pregnancy is not an illness." "I know, but still." "You are carrying our child. That is important." Sophia softened, touching his face. "Yes, it is. And I promise I will be careful, but I am not going to stop working or riding or living my life. Women have been having babies forever." Lucas wanted to argue, wanted to wrap her in cotton and keep her safe, but he knew his wife. She was strong and stubborn and fully capable of deciding what was best for herself. So he just kissed her and promised to support her however she needed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sophia remained active well into her 6th month, though she did eventually have to stop riding when her belly got too large. Lucas hovered and worried, and Sophia tolerated it with good humor. Samuel visited often, excited about the prospect of becoming a grandfather, and Rosa knitted enough baby clothes for triplets. In March of 1885, on a night when the moon was full and bright, Sophia went into labor. Lucas rode like hell to fetch the midwife while Samuel stayed with Sophia, and by the time they returned, Rosa had everything prepared. The labor was long and difficult, as first labors often are, and Lucas paced outside the bedroom door like a caged animal, jumping at every sound. Just after dawn, the baby's cry split the air, strong and healthy. The midwife opened the door, smiling, and beckoned Lucas inside. Sophia lay exhausted but radiant in the bed, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when Lucas entered, and her smile was tired but triumphant. "Come meet your son," she said. Lucas crossed the room on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. His son had dark hair and a scrunched-up red face, and Lucas thought he was the most perfect thing he'd ever seen. "A boy," he whispered. "We have a boy. We do." What should we name him? They had discussed names for months but had not been able to agree on anything. Now, looking at his son, Lucas knew exactly what felt right. "What about Thomas, after my father?" Sophia considered, then nodded. "Thomas Kane, I like it. Hello, Thomas." "Welcome to the world, little one." Lucas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and put his arms around his wife and son, overcome with emotion. Everything he had ever wanted, everything he had ever dreamed of was right here in this room. His family, his life, his reason for being. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a lively, curious boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet determination. In 1887, Sophia gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline, and 2 years after that, another son they called James. The house that had seemed so spacious was suddenly filled with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving in a way that sometimes surprised him. He taught Thomas to ride and rope, brought Caroline wildflowers from the hills, and spent hours with James building toy barns and corrals. Sophia blossomed as a mother, somehow managing to balance the demands of 3 children with the running of their growing ranch. The ranch itself expanded as they prospered. Lucas bought more land from a neighbor who was moving east, and they increased their herd every year. They hired hands to help with the work, and Lucas earned a reputation as a fair and honest employer. Sophia kept the books and handled the money, and together they built something that would last, something they could pass on to their children. Samuel grew older but remained active, spending most of his time with his grandchildren and offering advice when Lucas or Sophia asked for it. Rosa continued to run the Graham household, though she too was slowing down, and she treated the Kane children as if they were her own grandchildren. Life was not without hardships. In 1889, a drought struck the valley, and they lost a portion of the herd. In 1891, Thomas broke his arm falling from a tree, and Sophia spent 3 days hardly sleeping, watching over him. There were lean years and fat years, good times and bad. But through it all, Lucas and Sophia faced everything together, their partnership as strong as ever. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Sophia back to the pond. It had become something of a tradition for them, visiting the place where their story had begun on special occasions. The pond looked different now, surrounded by cottonwoods that had grown tall and provided shade. In the summer, it was a popular swimming hole for local children, though everyone was careful and respectful of the water. 10 years, Sophia said, looking out over the water. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Do you ever regret it? Lucas asked. Marrying me, I mean. Giving up the chance for a life somewhere else, somewhere bigger than Winnetka. Sophia turned to him, her face serious. Lucas Kane, I have never regretted a single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted. Love, partnership, a family, a life that matters. Why would I want to be anywhere else? I just want to make sure you are happy. I am more than happy. I am complete. She took his hands in hers. That day when I fell through the ice, I thought my life was ending, but it was really just beginning. You did not just save my life that day. You gave me a life worth saving. Lucas pulled her close, holding her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Sophia. More today than yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." "That is terribly poetic for a cowboy. I have been practicing." They laughed together, easy and comfortable in the way of couples who have built a life together through work and love and shared purpose. Then they walked back to their house hand in hand, ready for whatever the future might bring. The 20th century arrived with excitement and trepidation. The world was changing rapidly, with new technologies and ideas sweeping across the country. Automobiles appeared in the larger cities, though they were still rare novelties in rural California. The railroad expanded, making it easier to ship cattle and connect with distant markets. Lucas adapted to the changes, always looking for ways to improve the ranch and secure his family's future. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Caroline was bright and headstrong, determined to attend college despite the raised eyebrows of neighbors who thought education was wasted on girls. James was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book or sketching the landscape in charcoal. In 1903, tragedy struck when Samuel Graham died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. The entire valley mourned him, and Lucas and Sophia grieved the loss of a man who had been father, friend, and mentor. They buried him next to his wife in the small cemetery on the hill, and Sophia spent long hours at the grave, talking to her parents and remembering. "I wish they could have seen the children grow up," she said one afternoon, standing beside Lucas at the graveside. "I wish they could have known how good life turned out to be." "I think they know," Lucas said gently, "and I think they are proud of you, of us, of everything we built." The Graham Ranch merged fully with the Kane property, making them one of the largest landholders in the valley. It was a lot of responsibility, but Lucas and Sophia were ready for it. Thomas stepped up to help more with the daily operations, showing the leadership skills that would serve him well when he eventually took over. Caroline left for college in San Francisco in 1904, breaking barriers and making her parents proud even as they missed her terribly. She wrote home faithfully, telling them about her classes and the exciting energy of the city. James decided he wanted to be an architect, and Lucas supported the decision even though it meant his youngest son probably would not stay in ranching. "We raised them to follow their dreams," Sophia reminded him when Lucas expressed disappointment. "We cannot be upset when they do exactly that." "I know. I just always imagined all of them here carrying on what we built. Thomas will do that, and the others will visit. We will always be a family no matter where they are." She was right, as she usually was. The family remained close despite the distances and different paths. They gathered for holidays and special occasions, and the house was once again filled with noise and laughter when everyone was home. In 1908, Thomas married a sweet young woman named Mary, and they gave Lucas and Sophia their first grandchild, a little girl named Elizabeth. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Lucas was transported back to that cold February day in 1883, when he'd pulled Sophia from beneath the ice. Everything since then, every joy and triumph and moment of love, had stemmed from that single decision to risk everything for someone he did not know. "What are you thinking about?" Sophia asked, watching him cradle the baby. "Just how grateful I am for all of it. For you. We were lucky, were we not, to find each other the way we did. It was more than luck. It was meant to be." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Caroline graduated from college and became a teacher, eventually returning to California and settling in Sacramento. James moved to Los Angeles to work for an architectural firm, designing some of the new buildings that were transforming the city. Thomas and Mary added 2 more children to the family, keeping the ranch house full of life. Lucas and Sophia grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines, but their love never diminishing. If anything, it deepened with time, seasoned by shared experiences and the knowledge that they had built something lasting. They still rode out together when the weather was good, still checked the herds and surveyed their land with satisfaction. They still visited the pond on special occasions, remembering the day that had changed everything. Rosa passed away in 1912, surrounded by the family she had helped raise. They mourned her deeply, understanding that they had lost not just an employee but a beloved member of their family. The valley held a wake that drew people from miles around, all wanting to pay respects to a woman who had been a fixture of the community for decades. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Lucas was in his 50s now, still strong and capable but slowing down enough to appreciate the mornings on the porch with coffee and his wife beside him. Sophia managed the ranch finances with the same sharp mind she'd always had, though she let Thomas handle more of the day-to-day decisions. They were entering the phase of life where they could enjoy the fruits of their labor, spend time with grandchildren, and take satisfaction in what they had built. One evening in the spring of 1915, they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and purple. The air was warm and fragrant with blooming wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. Lucas held Sophia's hand, their fingers intertwined as naturally as breathing. "You remember the first time we sat here?" Sophia asked. "When the house was brand new and we had nothing but hopes and dreams." "I remember everything," Lucas said. "Every conversation, every laugh, every moment, it is all precious to me. We have had a good life, have we not? The best life, better than I ever imagined possible." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge. 32 years had passed since that frozen February day, but the memory was as vivid as ever. Lucas could still feel the terror of breaking through the ice, still remember the weight of Sophia's body as he dragged her to safety, still see her face when she first opened her eyes and looked at him. "I would do it again," he said suddenly. "If I had to. If I had the choice to make over, knowing everything that would come after, I would still jump off that horse and run onto the ice. Because you are worth any risk. You always were." Sophia lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "And I would fall through that ice again if it meant finding you on the other side. We were meant to be together, Lucas. Fate or chance or divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, we were meant to be." They kissed, slow and sweet, a kiss that held 3 decades of love and commitment and partnership. Around them, the ranch hummed with life, the legacy they had built together, the family they had created, the home they had made. It was everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of during those early days when they were just a cowboy and a rancher's daughter falling in love. The grandchildren came to visit often, running wild through the fields just as their parents had done before them. Lucas taught them to ride and rope, passing on the skills his own uncle had taught him decades ago. Sophia told them stories, sharing the history of the family and the valley, making sure they understood where they came from. The children loved the story of how their grandparents met, the dramatic tale of ice and rescue and true love, and they never tired of hearing it. "Tell us again, Grandma," Elizabeth would say, curled up in Sophia's lap. "Tell us how Grandpa saved you." And Sophia would tell it, with Lucas adding his own perspective, and the children would listen with wide eyes, believing absolutely in the power of courage and love. As the years advanced into the 1920s, the world continued to change. The Great War came and went, taking some young men from the valley and changing others who returned. Automobiles became common, and paved roads began to replace dirt tracks. Electricity reached Winnetka, bringing lights and new conveniences. But the fundamentals of ranch life remained the same. Cattle still needed tending, land still needed care, and family still mattered above all else. Thomas took over most of the ranch operations as Lucas slowed down, but Lucas remained involved, offering advice and wisdom earned through decades of experience. Sophia focused her energy on her grandchildren and on community work, helping establish a library in Winnetka and supporting the local school. They were pillars of the community, respected and loved, their story part of the valley's folklore. In the summer of 1925, on a warm afternoon when the sky was impossibly blue, Lucas and Sophia took one last ride to the pond. They were in their 60s now, both still capable but conscious that time was advancing. The pond looked peaceful and inviting, nothing like the dangerous trap it had been 42 years earlier. "I cannot believe it has been so long," Sophia said, dismounting carefully. "More than 4 decades since that day." "Best decision I ever made," Lucas said, joining her at the water's edge. "Running out onto that ice. Worst decision I ever made, taking that shortcut." Sophia smiled. "But it led to the best life I could have imagined." They stood together, looking out over the water, both of them remembering. Lucas could still recall every detail with perfect clarity. The sound of the ice cracking, the darkness of the water, the desperate fear when he could not find her at first, the overwhelming relief when his hands closed on fabric and he pulled her up, the way her eyes had looked when she first woke up, confused and grateful and already somehow familiar. "What do you think would have happened if you had not been there that day?" Sophia asked quietly. "You would have died, and I would have lived the rest of my life never knowing what I had missed. There would have been no us, no Thomas or Caroline or James, no grandchildren, none of this." It is strange to think about how one moment can change everything. One moment, one decision, one choice to take a risk. Lucas turned to look at his wife, seeing past the lines and gray hair to the young woman he had pulled from the frozen pond. "I am glad I took that risk. It gave me everything." Sophia took his hand and squeezed it. "Me too, all of it, all the love and the work and the family and the life. I would not change a single thing." They rode back to the house slowly, savoring the warm afternoon and the familiar landscape. The ranch spread out around them, productive and well-tended, a testament to decades of hard work and careful stewardship. Their home sat on the hill, solid and welcoming, filled with memories of laughter and tears, and all the moments that make a life. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. Thomas and Mary and their children, Caroline visiting from Sacramento with her husband, James up from Los Angeles for the week. The table was crowded and noisy, with multiple conversations happening at once and children squirming in their seats. It was chaotic and perfect. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the children were playing outside in the fading light, the adults sat on the porch sharing stories and enjoying the cool evening air. Someone brought up the story of how Lucas and Sophia had met, and even though everyone had heard it 100 times, they listened attentively. Lucas told it simply, without embellishment, just the facts of that cold February day. But Sophia added the emotion, talking about the terror of being trapped under the ice and the overwhelming gratitude when strong hands had pulled her to safety. She talked about looking at Lucas for the first time and feeling something shift in her chest, some recognition that this man would be important to her. "We had no idea it would turn into all this," she said, gesturing at the family gathered around them. "We were just 2 people who met because of an accident, but we chose to make something of it. We chose love and partnership and building a life together. That was the real decision, not the rescue itself. Thomas raised his glass. To making good choices, and to the best parents anyone could ask for. Everyone echoed the toast, and Lucas felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was his legacy, not just the land and the cattle, but this family, these people who carried forward the values he and Sophia had tried to instill. Love and hard work and treating others fairly. Taking care of the land and each other. Building something that would last beyond their own lives. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joys and sorrows as all years do. Lucas and Sophia celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933 with a party that drew people from across the valley and beyond. They cut a cake, danced to fiddle music just like on their wedding day, and marveled at how full their lives had become. 50 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a ranch that had become one of the most successful in the region. More than they had ever dared to dream. In the late 1930s, Lucas's health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of years and hard work taking their toll. He spent more time in his chair on the porch, watching the ranch operations rather than participating in them. Sophia stayed by his side, as she had for over half a century, reading to him and talking about the old days and simply being present. On a crisp autumn morning in 1939, Lucas woke before dawn as he always had. Sophia was beside him, still sleeping, her face peaceful in the dim light. He watched her for a moment, this woman who had been his partner in everything, and felt a wave of love so intense it took his breath away. He rose quietly and made his way to the porch, wrapping himself in a blanket against the morning chill. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with color, and the ranch was still quiet, that peaceful hour before the world fully wakes. Lucas sat in his favorite chair and looked out over the land he had worked for more than 50 years, and he felt at peace. Sophia found him there an hour later, still in his chair, a slight smile on his face as if he was dreaming of something pleasant. She knew immediately that he was gone, that his heart had simply stopped in the quiet of the morning. She sat down beside him and took his hand, and she cried, mourning the loss of her partner and best friend, the man who had saved her life and then made that life worth living. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over California to pay their respects. Lucas had been beloved in the community, known for his fairness and integrity, and the quiet way he helped those in need. The pastor spoke about his life, about the dramatic rescue that had started it all, and the decades of partnership that had followed. But the most moving tribute came from Sophia herself. She stood at the front of the church, small and dignified in her black dress, and spoke about the man she had loved for more than 50 years. She talked about his courage and his kindness, his strength and his gentleness. She told the story of that February day in 1883 one more time, her voice steady despite her tears. He could have ridden past, she said. He could have gone for help or decided it was too dangerous, but he did not. He ran onto that ice without hesitation because someone needed help, and that was the kind of man he was. He spent his whole life like that, helping people, building things, making the world better just by being in it. I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife, to build a life with him, to love him and be loved by him. He saved my life that day, but what he really did was give me a life worth saving, and I will carry that gift with me until my own last breath. There was not a dry eye in the church. Sophia lived for another 8 years, remaining active and engaged despite her grief. She spent her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories and values that mattered. She made sure the ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, and she kept detailed journals documenting the history of the family and the valley. She visited Lucas's grave every week, talking to him and updating him on family news, maintaining the connection that death could not sever. On a spring morning in 1947, Sophia passed away peacefully in her sleep, exactly as Lucas had. She was 86 years old, and she had lived a full and remarkable life. The family buried her next to Lucas, their graves side by side on the hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The legacy they left behind was substantial. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas and then his children. Caroline's work in education influenced thousands of students over the decades. James's architectural designs dotted the California landscape. But more than the tangible accomplishments, Lucas and Sophia left behind a story of love and courage that became part of the fabric of the valley. People still tell the story of the cowboy who broke through the ice to save a drowning woman, and how that single act of courage led to one of the great love stories of the region. Parents tell it to their children as an example of bravery and quick thinking. Couples reference it as proof that true love exists. The pond itself became something of a landmark, with a small plaque installed by the family telling the story of what happened there in February 1883. Decades later, when the ranch was still in the family but had grown and changed with the times, descendants of Lucas and Sophia would visit the pond and the graves and the old house, now preserved as part of the family heritage. They would hear the stories and look at the old photographs and try to imagine what it must have been like, that day when everything changed. The house still stood, weathered but solid, a testament to the work Lucas and Sophia had put into building it. The porch where they had spent countless evenings still offered views of the valley. The fence lines Lucas had ridden for decades still marked the boundaries of the property. And in the family cemetery on the hill, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of Lucas Kane and Sophia Graham Kane, beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents, pioneers and partners. But their true monument was not made of stone or wood. It was in the family they had created, the values they had instilled, the love they had demonstrated every day of their lives together. It was in the story of a young cowboy who saw someone in danger and did not hesitate, who risked everything for a stranger and found his entire life in the process. It was in the tale of a woman who survived against all odds and chose to build something beautiful with the man who had saved her. Lucas and Sophia's story became legend, but it was rooted in truth, in courage and love, and the simple decision to take a chance when it mattered most. They had met through tragedy and turned it into triumph. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. They had built a life and a family and a legacy that endured long after they were gone. And somewhere in heaven, or whatever comes after this life, Lucas and Sophia Kane were together still, holding hands and watching over the family they had created, proud of what they had built and grateful for every moment they had been given. The cowboy and the woman he pulled from the ice, partners for eternity, their love story complete but never forgotten.